Welcome to the first in an informal discussion series on building a more inclusive digital and analog world, where we'll learn about what's on the minds of experienced practitioners in the tech for social impact space. Today I'm speaking with Nathaniel Calhoun. Nathaniel advises startups, business leaders, and civil society about new approaches to change making. He focuses on new digital and cooperative business models, experiments in currency and value creation, along with conservation and legal personhood for nature. With that all out of the way, let's jump right in. Nathaniel, let me know, what's one big thing on your mind right now that you think we need to be paying more attention to?
Thanks for the introduction, Josh, and thanks for your question. I guess the thing that I've been thinking about the most recently is ways that new forms of money and currency can be created in order to introduce liquidity and financial diversity, and by that also financial resilience to vulnerable communities, especially those that are economically impacted by COVID, but also those that were disadvantaged or vulnerable beforehand.
Well, and are there particular models that you've seen out there that have attracted your interest?
Yeah, like I'm trying to kind of build basically a map of where this activity is taking place, which are the teams that are advancing it, and in which regards. And I'd say there's kind of, at the moment, there's like three places that I see this being put into practice. Because my interest isn't, for instance, a white paper crypto theoretical interest in this. It's really like, where are there teams that are putting this into practice, and where have they already studied a little bit the impacts of what they've done on a village, an industry, or a small economy. And so the three that kind of helped so far to create the map that I'm building in my mind of what this ecosystem is one of the earliest, one of the two longest standing teams is Grassroots Economics, based in Kenya. Grassroots Economics helped to create location-based currencies. So they might create a currency for a village or a neighborhood, and historically they would actually design the currency the way that it looked, and then print it out and then distribute it, so that everybody in the village would suddenly have some currency that could be spent amongst one another, and it was additional to whatever their national currency was and whatever other hard reserve currencies they may have been vying for. They're exploring ways of adding a digital layer to that, and there is a blockchain component coming through via a partnership of theirs with Bancor to look at how to make those interoperable. So there is kind of an interesting hard tech angle that it's headed towards, but it began as a literal like money printing exercise. So they're one node. Another then is Sardex in Sardinia and a few other places in Italy, which is an organization innovating in the space of mutual credit systems. And so mutual credit systems are really, well, so far from what I can see, when put into practice, they do best amongst businesses more than individuals, and businesses that have to reach a certain threshold of viability or liquidity already, familiarity. So the idea is that once your business passes the test to join the mutual credit system, your business obtains the right to debit or credit up to a certain amount. So maybe you can transact up to $10,000. You can demand $10,000 worth of services, and you can go into debt or deliver up to 10,000, but they'll usually have a cap so that one part of the network isn't over accumulating either the asset or the debt equivalent of the asset. So Sardex helped engineer that in Sardinia after the last financial recession, 2008, 2009, and really helped revitalize that whole area. And they're pushing more than 100 million euros worth of transactions through their system every year now. So it's like a massive scaled, legitimate success. And they've gone on to learn about creating other mutual credit systems around Italy. And then the final of the three nodes that's in the map in my head of like where these folks are is Cambiatus in Costa Rica, who are interested in what they're calling a decentralized autonomous communities. So not DAOs, but DACs.
Okay.
And the idea is creating digital tokens that can have all sorts of different rules to release within different, so far, almost like little industries. So for instance, you might have a market that has 70 market vendors within it, and they form kind of a small economy. And so they can have a coin amongst themselves that they can spend amongst themselves. And with that, they can obtain a certain amount of liquidity. So even if things are going hard at the market in general, they can still go around, buy themselves some food, get some nice things for the people they care about, and it just gives them a certain layer of resilience. They've got a couple pilots up and running in Costa Rica, a couple in Brazil, and I like their model because it's not location based. It doesn't have to be location based. It's not like this is a neighborhood currency. It can be nationwide, but just for everybody in a certain job or running a certain type of business.
Okay.
And so between those three, the territory will get bigger, but those three show you very different scales and sizes and intentions of currency experiment that are already very much like in practice, working well enough that I know each of those organizations has pent up demand for their services because they've already shown enough success to merit that.
Yeah. And do you think, I mean, I know you said in the case of the last one that it doesn't have to be necessarily location based, but do you see, what's currently happening with COVID and the breakdown of a lot of global and in some cases national supply chains? Do you see that being a driving force at all in the more of the community space, like moving towards how can communities or even at a state or a county level, or to localize some of that buying power?
Yeah, definitely, because like one of the original goals of the hyperlocal currency movement, it's been around for at least 20 years. The Transition Network helped to foster hundreds of experiments. Many of them failed, but they've all been learning. Was that they wanted money to be stored and saved and cycled within the local economy. And so when there were like small towns that were experiencing that sort of economic shock that comes when you have a Tesco or a Home Depot or a Walmart come in, they were like, man, everybody's spending, all the dollars are leaving the county, all the dollars are leaving the town. What if we had dollars that couldn't leave the town, that like only local businesses would take? And so part of it has always been about strengthening local supply chains and giving people a reason to spend locally.
Yeah.
And you can engineer incentives into it where, for instance, even if you peg the local currency to a foreign currency, like even if you say you call the currency an acorn and then you say one acorn is $1, but you can say you give us $20 and we'll give you 21 acorns. And so you can build whatever incentives you want into it. You can have it expire so that it has negative interest on it, so that people don't hoard it. You can distribute it when people conduct certain civic actions or train themselves or include vulnerable groups on their workforce. But yes, in general, to your question about supply chains, especially as this pandemic starts to expose underrated vulnerabilities in global supply chains, there may be any number of communities and places where people need to pivot their buying habits quickly. And one of the things that can help them to do that is if they actually have a new form of liquidity that functions optimally in their local area.
Yeah. And how are you seeing on the technology side this enabling? Because I remember 20 years ago or so, I was a intern at Mother Jones magazine, and there was a article there on Lawrence, Kansas, how they were doing hyper-local currency but paper-based. And I remember, I think William S. Burroughs was on the $3 bill. But anyway, a lot of it, you said,
Awesome.
they've a lot of those paper-based or hyper-localized currencies, and we don't have to stick to hyper-local here, but a lot of them have struggled. But now we're in sort of a new era where we have technologies that are enabling some of these to be done in ways that are much more viable than 20 years ago. So I'm curious, what have you been seeing in terms of what are some of those some of the secret sauce, or what are some of the factors there that you think are really helping to enable some of that viability and experimentation?
Well, I mean, the decentralized ledger technologies arena in general, with its emphasis on validating and authenticating and transactions, and then making things incredibly hard to forge or copy or defraud. That ecosystem is producing technologies that can help a group of socially minded and economically aware individuals access almost off the shelf hard technological solutions that move them towards credibility in an area where they would otherwise have had to ask for that credibility based purely on their reputations and their networks, personal networks. Now, I think that the more it's normalized that certain blockchains or certain smart contract platforms, the more laps they do without grievous error, the more comfortable bureaucrats are to shift towards being technocrats. And I was recently doing some consulting work in Somalia and Somaliland, looking at their financial inclusion landscape. And I've done a number of projects over the years that are kind of adjacent to cash transfer programs for the poor. One of the things that always stuck out was how much money goes into transporting and protecting money. How vulnerable people are when there's suitcases of money floating around before it reaches its destination, and then how the people at the destination become vulnerable. One of the things that's interesting about these industry constrained or demographically constrained currencies, because you could have a currency that only works for people between 13 years old and 18, and then once they turn 18, their currency's gone. Right? Like, you can actually look at ways of making it so that, like, you can't rob them, and if you rob them, you can't spend it. It's useless, right? So, like, the idea, that whole set of additional benefits that you can layer on top of, like, for one, it's money. For two, it's free. So free money is already a wonderful proposition. But then when you can make free money that cannot be put towards the financing of terrorism, it just can't. Like, it will not be useful for purchasing weapons or drugs. It will not be useful for sex trafficking. It will not be useful for political contributions, right? You can engineer out some of the ugliness of anonymous national currencies. And then you start noticing that even if it wasn't your intention, you may have safeguarded people much more than they were before. So yeah, I think that it comes down to people working out how to create essentially like electronic vouchers or digital tokens that your average bear simply cannot duplicate, crash, or defraud. When it's way harder, when it seems harder to actually buy and build a printing press to make forged money than to crack the digital system, you've kind of crossed a tipping point that makes technocrats sit up straight and pay a little bit more attention. So I've started to see, in each of these examples that I've given you, the national government in their respective country, they get this on their radar quickly. You can't go around printing money in a country and not get the attention of the federal government. You get their attention, right? And then they have to. So every one of these organizations that's still in operating and still legal, they've had to pass some very serious scrutiny from the very highest levels of government and the very highest levels of finance. And the fact that we're now looking at a number of these folks being, 2 years in, 5, 6, 7 years in, 11 or 12 years in, it's signaling to the global ecosystem that this whole area has become practicable. So I really think we're going to see I have more demand coming to me to help organizations think about how to set up pilots of this variety or advise them on this type of experiment, then the companies themselves are situated to process. Like they're already doing a lot of pilots, and they're like, oh, we can't handle another pilot right now. I'm not speaking for all of them. That's not like their official position, but there's a lot of demand. And 3 years ago, there wasn't. I did not see a lot of demand 3 years ago. I've been watching this space pretty closely for 6 or 7 years. And it's really changing. It's really changing. People's readiness to engage is really changing.
Awesome. Well, we want to keep these chats short, so let me just leave it with one last quick question. Where do you see, to get to the big, change, the big outcome in terms of increased inclusivity with what you've been talking about? Are there 2 or 3 things off the top of your head that you think need to be addressed, and where people can really be focusing their efforts to help us really actualize the potential?
I think we're at a moment where we just need everybody, like I'm talking to some like large INGOs and just being like, you guys are a couple years late, like start learning, run a pilot. Like for God's sakes, if you're still running like an old school cash transfer pilot, which is always going to be limited by the amount of hard donor related dollars that you have, like there's an economic cap on the ability that you have to roll that solution out. If you're in 55 countries and you're working with 500 million beneficiaries, like how many dollars are you going to reach each of them with? Yeah. Well, it could be like 100x that amount of currencies that you're minting or that you're helping to create within your networks. So like the potential is massive. What we need is for, like, I feel like you literally pick a giant NGO. They should be doing this. They should be testing it to see if it works. And then as soon as they see it works, and if they don't, the ones that are more humble, go look at the data. It works. Because it works, start bundling it in to some of your poverty alleviation, your gender empowerment, your disaster resilience programming. Start popularizing this, build a body of knowledge around this, because it's an essential part of building a new economy. Yeah. It's so like that's once there's a lot more people doing that, they'll spot the obstacles and the opportunities moving forward. Right now, it's just annoying that this has been out there for a while. The lessons are starting to be learned, and it feels like one of those like ready to go moments. And I would just like more practitioners need to get in the game, become comfortable with these experiments, share publicly their learnings, so that we can accelerate the whole space.
Awesome. Well, thanks a lot, Nathaniel, for sharing all this with us today. To anyone who's watching, I'd encourage you to share your thoughts and reactions in the comments. And of course, don't forget to like and subscribe to receive updates on future episodes.